I thought, I'm going to respond to that request of Jim's to dance in the church. Back in the late 1980s, we were pastoring over in Ekalaka, Montana, and a lot of the people in our congregation were involved with the steer ministry. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. I've seen a sign or two for it in this area. It's where farmers will devote maybe a cow or a couple acres to missions. And then when harvest comes, they send that money to the steer, and they move it on then to the mission that they've chosen there. They had a big conference in Bismarck, and since so many of our people were involved with the steer program, we went over to the missionary conference. And I still remember there was a missionary there, George Verver. He was with Operation Mobilization. He ministered for years in Holland, and his primary responsibility was to help get some churches back on track that had kind of fallen by the wayside and people had drifted away and so forth. He was working in this small church, and as so often happens, they were having some financial difficulties. And so he thought, there's a wealthy man in the congregation, I'm going to go and visit him and just see if maybe he can help us out some. He said he never got to that point of asking him, because as they were visiting, this older gentleman asked him the question, why don't we dance in church? And he said, as I thought about that, I thought of two reasons. He said, first of all, I said to him, well, one problem is you and I would probably be the only ones that would dance, and we don't dance very well. And then he said, the other problem is we only have one ambulance in town. And if we started dancing in church, I could just imagine the heart attacks, and what would we do? So I guess that's why we don't dance. We don't want to give somebody a heart attack. Okay, Genesis chapter 4. That has nothing to do with the message this morning. And I won't even charge you extra for it. Genesis chapter 4. Now, the man had relations with his wife Eve. She conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And again she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. And Abel on his part also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Cain told Abel, his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? He said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Behold, thou hast driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from the face I shall be hidden. I shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and it will come about that whoever finds me will kill me. So the Lord said to him, therefore whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, lest anyone finding him should slay him. And I realize that's a lengthy passage. We're not going to cover it all this morning. We're going to pick up parts of it again next week as we finish the rest of the chapter. But as we look at what is going on in this chapter, I'm reminded of the fact that history is really a very incomplete record of mankind. When you look at the Old Testament, chapters 1 through 11 covers over 2,000 years of history. So there's a lot that's not recorded that we have little or no knowledge about. And that's true no matter what area you study. I remember back in Ekalaka, they found a stone out on one of the ranches. It had a cross on it, and it had a date. The only problem was the date was long before any known white man ever came into that area. So they have no idea where the stone came from, what it was marking. Was it a gravestone? Nobody to this day is able to unravel the mystery of how that stone came into being there. We used to go down every year to Pittsburgh Landing down on the Snake River. And when you go down there and you wander around, you will find a whole series of petroglyphs on the rocks. Even to this day, nobody knows who carved them on the rocks. What do they really mean? What is the significance of it? And what happened to the people that were there originally? The questions that we just can't find all the answers to. And you struggle with that when you read the Bible as well. Questions abound. Where did Cain get his wife? How many children did Adam and Eve actually have? How did they live? What was their worship like? And on goes the questions that we can raise. What did they know about sacrifice? And yet, while Scripture is not a historical textbook, it is historically accurate when God speaks of historical events there. A lot of the questions I can answer very quickly for you. You don't need to know. If God wanted you to know, he would have told you. But if he didn't tell us, we don't need to know. What we do know is found in Romans 15. In verse 4 of Romans 15, he speaks of the fact, he said, whatsoever was written in earlier times, that's what we're looking at, it was written for our instruction, that through perseverance and encouragement of Scriptures, we might have hope. They were written to bring hope into our lives and into our situations today. We need that hope today. We look around us, and there's so much in the world around us that would detract from the idea of hope. So many situations going on, and we don't have any idea how they're going to play out. And yet God said, I want you to have an element of hope in your life. The fall must have devastated Adam and Eve. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be in a perfect environment, to have a meaningful occupation, to have all of your needs provided, to have a special relationship with God, and then suddenly, because you violated the Word of God, all of that came to an end, and they were expelled from the garden. I wonder if they struggled with life is over as far as we're concerned. We sometimes reach that point, don't we? They were devastated by the fall. What they needed was hope. And I think we get a glimmer of that in chapter 4 as we look at what's taking place with Cain and Abel here. But we've all struggled with that at times, haven't we? When it feels as if our life has come to an end. How do we move on after maybe a major financial reversal or a death of a loved one or struggles in some area? How do we pick up the pieces and move forward? Sometimes it's a doctor's diagnosis that we don't like. What was it that enabled Adam and Eve to struggle on? I believe it was their faith. Their faith in God, and that with it came that hope as well. Hebrews 11:1 speaks of the fact that faith is the substance of what? Of things hoped for. The evidence of things not yet seen. They didn't know what the future held, but they did know God. And so they were able to move forward by faith. God had made a promise to them back in chapter 3, verse 15. He spoke of the enemy there. It says that God was going to send the seed. He said, I'll put enmity between the woman and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head. You shall bruise him on the heel there. But there was a promise being made there, I believe, that God was going to send a Redeemer. Now, how much of that Adam and Eve fully grasped, I don't know. But I think they probably understood far more than what we realize. And again, the record is incomplete. How did they know what sacrifices to make and so forth? I believe God had a hand in that. I believe he taught them and gave them the pattern that they needed. So it was that faith that enabled them to continue to move forward here. And we are called to live by faith, aren't we? 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says, we walk by faith, not by sight. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it easier to walk by sight. It's much easier when everything, as a matter of fact, I often lay out the whole future for the Lord in prayer. You can do it this way, and all of this would be great. And I got a feeling sometimes the Lord just chuckles and says, I'm going to do it my way. But they believed that God knew what he was doing. And we need to have that faith in our lives as well. I remember the last time, I think it was, the Gaither Homecoming group came to Spokane. We had the opportunity to go in, and I know that's not, some of you, that's not your kind of music, but that's okay. We enjoy most of it. But I still remember sitting there in the auditorium, and I believe it was Michael Phelps sang that song, We'll Talk It Over in the By and By. I had never heard that song before. Now, I realize it's an older one. It was written back in the 1950s. But somewhere along the line, I totally missed that song. And it speaks of the idea that we don't understand what God is doing a lot of times in our life today. The tragedies, the trials that we go through. And it presents the idea that we're going to sit down with the Lord in heaven and talk it over. And we'll ask the questions, he'll tell us why. I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not, but it just seemed to minister to my heart at the time. He said, I will not question a broken heart. And the idea is we move forward, even though we don't understand sometimes the path that God gives to us there. Chapter 4 gives us insights into how Adam and Eve and their life progressed. As I said, we'll look at this for 2 weeks here, but they went from a devastating loss to a new life as God intended it for it. So we're going to have a contrast throughout this lesson this morning. We're going to begin, first of all, with 2 sons, and that's the first 2 sons that they had. The first one is Cain. He's the firstborn. His name is related to the word to get or gotten in Scripture. And I believe Eve had high hopes for Cain. I believe when he was born, she knew the promise of God, and she believed that God was sending the answer. She believed that this was the one that God was promising, that was going to be the Redeemer in a sense and set things right. Now, her problem was not her faith. Her problem was her timing. This was not the one. This was not the time. It was several thousand years later when that day would come. But she believed God, and she acted accordingly. You know, sometimes we get frustrated, don't we, with God's timing. You know, we ask for something, and we want it right now, don't we? We don't like to wait. I don't know about you, but I get frustrated when I drive through Ephrata and those stoplights are out of sync. It seems like sometimes every one of them turns red just as you get there. You would think if you stopped at the first one, you'd be able to make the second one, but that doesn't always happen in Ephrata. We get impatient sometimes, don't we? God's timetable is different than ours, and that's the way it was as far as Eve was concerned as well. There's a second child, and that's Abel. Now, interesting, the name that she gives him here, or they give him here, the root word suggests nothingness or insignificance. How would you like to live with that kind of a name? They really thought Cain was the one, so why do we need Abel? I remember years ago we worked with an Indian pastor on the Blackfoot Reserve outside of Calgary, Alberta. We would go down. He was trying to plant a church, and we would go out door to door visiting with him and so forth, and seek to share Christ with some of the people that he took us to. On one occasion, we went into this house, and there was a man there we had never met before. And we asked him his name, and he said, George, and then he just kind of slurred over the last name. And we asked the second time, and same thing. So we thought we better not ask the third time. Their names were very significant to them. They usually only had one name, and then the white man came along and said, you need two names. And so they would choose the second name would have something to do with something that happened around the time the person was born. We had one girl there in school that her name was Charlotte Backfat. What the significance of that was, I have no idea. But that was the name she had been given. Another whole family that we worked with, their last name was Yellow Old Woman. Again, they knew the significance of that, but they didn't tell us. So when we left the house that day, I said to the pastor that we were visiting with, I said, we couldn't catch his name. What was it? And he laughed. He said, his name is George Not Useful. He said, he doesn't like to share that name. And I could understand that. He didn't like, but he was stuck with it the rest of his life there. But they already thought they had the answer in Cain. The problem is, God looks at the heart. He doesn't look at the outside. Remember when Samuel came to anoint a new king, 7 of his brothers were brought before Samuel, and each one Samuel thought, this is the one. Look, they look good, they're strong, they're handsome and so forth. Every one of them, the Lord said no. Until finally, Samuel asked him, well, isn't there another son? And Jesse had to say, well, yeah, there's one out with the sheep. He's just a lad. And they called him, and God said, this is the one. He said, the Lord looks at the heart. He doesn't look at the outward appearance. He's more concerned with the heart. God sums up the character of these two men in 1 John chapter 2, or is it chapter 3, I guess it is. It says in verse 12, not as Cain, who was of the evil one and slew his brother. And for what reason did he slay him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Now, God knew that in advance. And later in the book of Hebrews, we read in Hebrews 11, by faith, Abel offered up a more excellent sacrifice. And his sacrifice was accepted by God. 2 children, same parents, and yet totally different in their lifestyle and their outlook on life. And I always marvel at that. I look at our 3 kids, and you'd think they have the same mom and dad, grew up in the same home, same rules and regulations, but all 3 of them are characters in a different way. And that often happens. So there were 2 sons. There was also 2 sacrifices here. Cain brought a sacrifice. Cain was a tiller of the land, a much needed occupation, because if they were going to survive, they had to have food. They didn't have a supermarket to go down to and buy it at. I remember a while back seeing a bumper sticker on the back of a pickup truck. It said, if you've eaten breakfast this morning, thank a farmer. It's a much needed occupation. And there was nothing wrong with Cain's tilling of the land. He brought the fruit of the land, probably brought the first fruits. I have a suspicion that it was some of the best that he had to offer there. You know what the first fruits are. I remember we had a huge garden when we moved to our house in Lillooet, British Columbia. Huge garden area, and I planted all kinds of vegetables. And we were looking forward to that first ripe tomato. And if you do that, when summer comes, you watch, and we had our eye on one it was the first one that was turning red, and we were just going to wait maybe another day or two before we picked it to make sure it was fully ripe. I went out to pick it, and my neighbor had his eye on it, and he picked it before I did. we lost the first fruits. We did forgive them. They were an older couple, and we knew them quite well, but we felt cheated out of the first fruit that year. We had a lot of tomatoes, and it was okay. But bringing the best of the crops was a legitimate sacrifice in the Old Testament times. If you were bringing a thank offering, you could bring some of the grain, you could bring some of the fruit, the olives or whatever it was that you were raising. It was a legitimate sacrifice to make. Abel brings his sacrifice, and we read that Abel was a tender of livestock, rancher, another important occupation. Again, where would we be without it? Where would we get our bacon or our steaks or our ham or whatever it may be, whatever kind of meat that you like there? The problem comes in verse 4 and 5, where God accepted the offering of Abel, but he didn't accept the offering of Cain. And we can only speculate on why, because again, it's an incomplete record. He doesn't give us all of the information. We do know, as we looked in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 4, we know that it was by faith that Abel offered to God a better sacrifice, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks there. Abel brought it in faith. Now, I'm sure that Cain also had faith in God. But what was the difference there? I believe the difference there, because it speaks of being made righteous and so forth, I believe that they were bringing before God a sin offering. When you see how God deals with Cain in just a few verses later, he says, sin's crouching at your door and so forth. There was nothing wrong with a grain offering if it was given as a thank offering. But if it was given as a sin offering, it did not meet the requirements that God had. And I believe God had revealed that to Adam and Eve and passed that on to their children as well. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22 says, almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no remission or no forgiveness there. So if he was bringing a thank offering to cover his sin, God says that you can't do that. The pattern, I believe, was set back in 3:21 there, where God took an animal, slew the animal, made the coats of skin. I think that was the first sacrifice, and God was revealing his plan and purpose there to them. And I think the warning in that is we need to come to God on his terms. John 14:6 says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Men and women today are trying all different ways of coming to God. It's not working. We have to come through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for us. The foundation of our faith has to be the Word of God. We dare not explain it away. We dare not turn away from it. It is our pattern for life. James chapter 4, verse 17 says, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And I think that was part of the problem with Cain's sacrifice. He knew the requirements of God. He just chose not to do it. And if we're not careful, don't we do the same thing sometimes? You ever rationalize wrong behavior? Yeah, you know, okay, we're driving down the highway, it says 60 miles an hour, and we're doing 70. Why? Well, for one thing, we're in a hurry. so we can get away with it. For another thing, there's no police around. So why do we have to worry about it? We rationalize that behavior away. And yet, if you just come around the corner and there's a policeman sitting there, your rationalization doesn't do a whole lot of good at that point, does it? The law is the law in that case. So that led to two choices here. Now, I'm reversing the order here. So if you've already started scribbling your notes, Keynes, you got it wrong. Why am I reversing the order? I don't know. I didn't realize that till I looked it over this week, but I guess I'm doing it because I can do it. I wrote the outline, so I can put Abel first here this time. We want to look first at Abel's choice. His choice was the right one. It was based, I believe, on the Word of God. But as we look at his choice, we need to be careful that we don't come to some false conclusions here. Have you ever had somebody tell you when you were growing up, just do the right thing and everything will be okay? It doesn't always work out that way, does it? Sometimes you do the right thing and it costs you something. Here, Abel did the right thing and it cost him his life. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, in verse 12, it says, all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall what? Everything will be happy and blessed in their life? No, that's not quite what it says. It says they will suffer persecution. We do the right thing. Sometimes there is a cost involved in that. And so sometimes we wonder, well, why bother? If it's going to cost me to do what's right, why bother? I remember I didn't understand this course when I started going to church about 8, 9 years of age. In Sunday school, we used to sing a little chorus, and I haven't heard it for years, but it was with eternity's values in view. Any of you remember that one? Because I'm not the oldest one here. You do? All right, great. May I do each day's work for Jesus with eternity's values in view. Now, as a young child, I couldn't understand that. Nice song, but what did it really mean? But the older I get, the more I realize we have to live with eternity's values in view. We have to realize that this world is not our final home. Jesus on one occasion said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Today, there's a cross involved in our life. Today, there's that denial at times. Tomorrow comes the crown. And so if God asks us to do something today, irregardless of how it turns out, we have the responsibility to do it, to follow him, to do what it is that he would ask of us. I was thinking of that last week, going over to Twila. I was visiting with somebody, and I said, this is not what I had planned for retirement, to get involved in a situation like this. I hadn't even planned on being here as interim pastor in retirement. I'm glad that we're here, and it's been a blessing, but we have to live with the idea that if God says do it, we have a responsibility to do it. No matter what it is, and no matter how it turns out, we have the responsibility to make the choice of living in accordance with God and his word. Cain's choice was just the opposite. He knew what God expected, but he chose not to do it. Proverbs 14:12 says, there's a way that seemeth right unto man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. And that's what is illustrated, I think, here in the life of Cain. Two things come out of Cain's choice. First of all, he reacted in anger. God did not accept the sacrifice, and so he becomes angry. There's a danger in anger. There is a legitimate time for us to be angry. And certainly Christ was angry when he cleansed the temple and so forth. But we need to be careful in our anger. In Matthew chapter 5, And in dealing with anger, Jesus said, I say to you, well, start in verse 21, it says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit murder. Now, I think if I asked for a show of hands, probably most of us would say, we've never murdered anybody. We may have wanted to. We might have wanted to wring somebody's neck at times, but we haven't actually done it. But he says, I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, or thou fool, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And so there is the danger of anger there. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 says, be ye angry and sin not. When we find ourselves getting angry, it's a warning to be careful, because if we're not careful, we'll go too far in that anger. And James goes so far as to say, in James 1:19, this you know, my beloved brethren, but let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak. Ever wrestle with that? Quick to hear, slow to speak. We like to speak, don't we? But we need to be quick to answer there. And then he goes on to say, be slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Cain learned that the hard way there. Anger is a signal that we need to be careful in that moment of what we say and what we do. It was Aristotle years ago who said, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. And so we need to be careful of anger. He became angry, he lashed out, and he killed his brother. And then he responded not only in anger, but I believe he responded with deception here as well. He tried to avoid the consequences of his anger. God comes to him, and we're going to come back to this next week, but God comes to him and says, where's your brother? What did he say? Am I my brother's keeper? I don't know. Well, that was a lie. He did know where he was, but he was trying to avoid the consequences of his action. And yet God took the initiative in verses 5 and 6. He's seeking to reach out, I believe, to Cain at this time. And he says, Cain, I already know where your brother is. I know his blood still cries out from the ground and so forth here. I believe we get a glimpse of Luke 19:10 in God's actions at this point. In Luke 19:10, Jesus said that he came to seek and to save that which was lost. And I believe he was reaching out to a lost sinner here. And we'll see that as we look at our next point here. But as I think about that, you may have made some wrong choices in your life. You may have entertained sin at times. And yet, God provides a means of escape. We dare not cover up that sin. We dare not make excuses for it. Proverbs 28:13 says, he that covereth his sin will not prosper. But he that forsaketh it, confesses and forsaketh it, he will obtain mercy there. God is still a merciful God. He's still reaching out to those who are sinners today. There were two destinies here. And again, we don't have all the details of what is going on here. But notice Abel's destiny. Because of Cain's anger, he died. And yet, he's home with God in glory today. Hebrews 12:24 speaks of the fact that even today his blood still speaks there. I think of someone like Jim Elliot, the missionary to the Auca Indian people down in Ecuador back in the 1950s, who had a tremendous desire to reach the tribe with the gospel message. And in the process, he lost his life. He and four other men had gone in attempting to make contact. That they were put to death. Jim Elliot on one occasion said, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Jesus had said, what's it profit if we gain the whole world and we lose our soul? He recognized there that he would be foolish to try and save his life if God said it's time to come home here. We need to realize, I think, that death is not the end for the child of God. I like the attitude of Dwight L. Moody, the great evangelist. One day he said, "Someday you'll read in the papers that D.L. Moody of East Northfield is dead. Don't you believe one word of it. At that moment, I shall be more alive than I am now. I shall have gone up higher, that's all, out of this old clay tenement into a house that is immortal, a body that death cannot touch, sin cannot taint, a body fashioned like his glorious body." For the child of God, we need to keep eternal values in view. Yes, we may lose our life for the cause of Christ, as far as this world is concerned, but we'll be home with him in glory. Paul said to be absent from the body is what? To be present with the world. It's not the end. It's a new beginning for the child of God. Cain's destiny, on the other hand, was given in verse 11. The ground was going to be cursed on his behalf. He was going to become a fugitive, a wanderer, a vagrant. His was going to be a difficult life. He had to live with the consequences of his sin for the rest of his life. And yet, I think in the midst of this, we get a glimpse of the grace of God. Notice in verse 13, Cain cries out to the Lord, "My punishment is too great to bear. You've driven me away from the face of the ground," and so forth. "Anyone that finds me will kill me," and so forth. And then you come down to verse 15. God listens to him, listens to what he's saying here. He comes down to verse 15. He says, "Then the Lord said to him, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, lest anyone finding him should slay him." Why would God do that? I believe God was still reaching out to Cain, still seeking to bring him into a right relationship with himself there. And you can disagree with me on this or not, but I don't think we know the end of the story. What ultimately happened to Cain? Did he eventually respond to the grace of God? I know he's described as a child of the devil in 1 John, but the fact of the matter is we were too. Ephesians chapter 2 speaks of the fact that we were dead in trespasses and sin. We were under the dominion of Satan. We were part of his kingdom there. And yet God, in his grace, found a way to redeem us, to bring him to himself, and to have a right relationship with himself. And as I think of that, I think of 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, where it says, "Today is still the day of salvation." God's still at work. He's still drawing men and women to himself there. Did Cain ultimately make the right choice? I don't know. I'm thankful that I am not Cain's judge. I don't have to decide that. I'm often asked, I remember years ago during the funeral service for a young lady I had never met. She was living in Spokane. We were living in Cul-de-sac, Idaho. She had called up her daughter, asked her to come home. Her intention, they believe, was that she was going to kill the daughter and then kill herself. But because the daughter was delayed in coming, she took her own life and had no church connection in Spokane or anywhere. The only connection she had was a lady in our church, was her aunt, and had her stay there at times and had gone to vacation Bible school and so forth, so she didn't know actually where she stood with the Lord. But she felt we really need a service for closure, so she asked if I would do a service, and I said I would do that. I still remember after, I didn't try to get her into heaven, and I didn't try to say that she wasn't in heaven. That wasn't my responsibility at that point in time. I did give the gospel message and shared how a person can be right with God. After it was over, the tradition was you have a big dinner after the funeral service, and the ladies in the church, they love to put on those dinners. And when everything was finished, the ladies were cleaning up. I went to the door, and her husband came up to me. And he looked at me and he said, "Is it going to be all right?" And I said, "Well, we're finished." I didn't know what he was asking for. He said, "No, that's not what I mean." He said, "Is she going to make it?" And I had to share with him, "I don't know. I'm not the judge." I said, "It's possible she had made a decision. I don't know as her life was slipping away what she might have thought in her final moments of her life." I said, "We have to leave that in God's hands." But I said, the important thing is, are you ready? Because we're all headed that direction. And it was a new thought for him, that the day was coming when he was going to have to answer before God for his life as well. As we think of what's going on here today, have you made some foolish choices? Just like Cain? Has God in his grace reached out to you, and have you found his forgiveness and his cleansing? Or are you letting the past determine who you are and defeat you today? You don't have to live in the past. Jesus Christ went to the cross. He became the ultimate sacrifice for us, and it's through his blood that we can have forgiveness of sin as well. We don't live under the shadow of the past. I read of a lady that was sitting in a service where they had communion that Sunday. And as the elders took the plate and passed it down her row, she was sitting there with tears streaming down her face, and she just passed the plate on. The pastor watching this, as the elders or the ushers moved on down the aisle, he picked up another plate and took it to her, knelt down before her, and said, "Take it. It's for sinners." If we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. He asks us to search our hearts before the Lord. But as we do that, then we are able to take part. We may have stumbled. We may have failed. You may even be at a place where you wonder, how in the world can we face life any longer? How can we move forward from this point? God is there for you. He wants to reach out just as he was reaching out to Cain and draw you into a right relationship with himself. There is hope today. As we celebrate the communion elements, I'm just going to read that before I make a comment on that. 1 Corinthians 11, he says, "I received from the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus in the night in which he was betrayed took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way also he took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as oft as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Lord's death until he comes.'" And that's the phrase I want us to focus on as we think of the elements today. The bread representing his body, the cup representing his blood that was given to us. He said, "Do this until I come." He is coming again. We have the hope of a glorious future in eternity with him. I don't care what's going on in the world today. I know, I shouldn't say I don't care, but it's not going to stop the work of God. God is still on the throne. God is still in control. We don't have to give up hope today as we look at the direction society is going and what's going on in the Ukraine and so forth. We can have hope because Jesus Christ is coming again. And so as we partake of this, let's focus on the hope of eternal life that God has given to us. I'm going to ask you to bow with me for a moment of silent prayer, because he does ask us to search our hearts and our minds to make sure that we are in right relationship with him. I challenged the church in Chewelah last week. They're going through some difficult struggles. And they were going to have a meeting this week where everybody was going to tell all of what they thought were the problems and lay it all out on the table, and everything was going to be fine. And I said, you know what? you're celebrating communion next Sunday. Wouldn't it be better to search your hearts and minds and to confess your sin before you partook of those elements rather than parading it before everybody in the congregation? I said, you'd be far better to get down on your knees and ask for his forgiveness and his cleansing than to try and get your own way. I don't know what happened. I heard that the meeting was postponed. When I heard that, I said, praise the Lord. God's working in hearts and lives, and maybe something good will come out of that. But now is the time to search our hearts. Maybe you are discouraged. Maybe you've had a tough week or two. Don't give up that hope. God is still at work. Bring it to him and ask for his help. So let's have a moment of silent prayer together.